morning. Welcome once again to the Sanctuary of Worship Presbyterian Church. You will see today I have a little script with me, which you know is rare. But I think just as all of us, I'm still processing what happened this week, and to make sure I don't go off on a tangent, I made sure that I have stuff on paper. Today, you would notice that the title of the sermon is Inscription of Hope. And it's actually the name of a song. It's a beautiful song. And I want to read the song for you. At the end of the sermon, you will hear our quartet singing it. And it goes like this. Let me take off my glasses. I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. And I believe in love, even when no one's here or there. I believe in God, even when He is silent. I believe through any trial, there is always a way. But sometimes in the suffering and hopeless despair, my heart cries for shelter, to know someone's there. But a voice rises within me saying, hold on, my child, I'll give you strength, I'll give you hope. Just stay a little while. I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. And I believe in love when there is no one there. And I believe in God when He is silent. I believe through any trial, there is always a way. May there be someday be sunshine. May there someday be happiness. May there someday be love. May there someday be peace. It's really beautiful, and it speaks to me. I love the part about having your trust in God when things are not going well and you feel so alone. I love the human sentiment that when we're suffering, we want somebody there, somebody to hear, somebody to witness that we are suffering. And if you look at the book in which the lyrics and the music is published, in the beginning of the song, there's a little epigraph that explains to you the origins of the song, and I will read it for you. It says, the Holocaust is a stunning reminder of the tragic results of prejudice and hate towards other people. But it is also a reminder that hope held firm will eventually reign victorious over the greatest of odds. The following words were inscribed on the walls of a cellar in Cologne, Germany, where Jews were hiding from the Nazis during World War II. Hope was all that they had to hold on to. Hope was their only bridge to a brighter tomorrow. And that took me a little bit the sail out of my wind, or the winds out of my sail. The words they are talking about is not the whole song. They're talking about the first three lines where it says, I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. I believe in love when there is no one there. I believe in God, even when He is silent. And those are powerful words. I can understand why this will speak to anybody hearing it, because it reminds us when things get really dark that we hold on to this hope and trust that God is still in control, God is still in power, and eventually God will bring evil under control. But then I realized two things bugged me about the song. The first one was that it says there is always a way. And because this song is based on words written by somebody who was Jewish during the Second World War, hiding in a cellar, I feel that's a little bit disingenuous. There isn't always a way out. There wasn't for the 6 million Jews that died in genocide during Second World War. So I don't think this person who wrote these words were specifically thinking that. And then I did a little bit of research. I want to know now where these words are. I want to go see it on the wall where it's written in Germany. I love to travel, so here I go. And I did a lot of research. And I figured out nobody actually knows. There is no wall in the city of Cologne, Germany, in any cellar where you will find these words. Actually, the first time these words were uttered was in 1945, just at the end of the Second World War. In the spring of 1945, when the Allied forces were moving through Germany and starting to arrest German soldiers, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, did a whole series of interviews with German soldiers, POWs, soldiers that were prisoners of war. And they had this one guy that they did the interview with, and it's in German, so it had to be translated too. So now you're going to lose some of it. And they talked to this soldier, and he talks a lot about how when he was young, he resisted the social nationalistic movement in Germany, and how he was against the Nazis, and how his friends stood up to it and resisted. But in the end, he became a soldier, and he was a soldier for 5 years. And then suddenly he says the following thing. He says this: in a shelter in Cologne, where young Catholics were keeping some Jews in hiding because their lives were threatened, American soldiers found the following inscription: I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. I believe in God, even when he is silent. I believe in love, even when it is not apparent. Germany was forced to reckon with what it did, and people were forced to. And I think this soldier is struggling with that. He's struggling with what he was part of, and he's trying to reconcile it, and he's trying to sort of comfort himself, because I think it gave him some comfort to think that there were some Christians, at least some Christians, who stood up and were willing to die for their neighbors, because he wasn't one of them. And I think that gave him comfort. I think that's why he told this little story. So just want to point something out, maybe you picked it up, is that the words were changed. In the song you heard, I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love when it is not apparent. I believe in God when he is silent. But the inscription on the wall, according to the soldier who heard it from American soldiers, so we're talking oral history here, said, first, I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in God even when he's silent. I believe in love when it is not apparent. Now that looks like a small thing to change those two last things, but it has very different meaning and understanding. If you put I believe in God after I believe in love, then it is that theology of belief that behind everything God is there, that in the end justice will reign, in the end God will get involved, in the end God cares. That deep trust that we have in God. And that is the song I just read for you. That is what it is trying to convey, that feeling of comfort. But that's not what the person wrote in the wall. The last thing they wrote is I believe in love when it is not apparent. And that sort of makes sense to me. If you live in a country where people are trying to exterminate every single one of your family members, everyone you know, it takes a lot still to believe in love, still to believe in the goodness of humanity, still to believe that there is people that will stand up and care. When we are faced with suffering, horrid evil, tragedy, whether it is in a big scale or a small scale, there's three ways we as humans usually respond. And all of them has something to do with our own self-protection. And the first one is the one I alluded to, that, yes, of course the Germans knew that people were being exterminated in death camps all across the country and in Poland. They knew, and they lived in denial and apathy till they were forced to confront the horror. It sort of make me think of how we're responding right now if we say 550,000 people have lost their life to COVID. If I say that, did you feel anything right now? I know you didn't. I didn't. It's human nature. It's one thing to see a neighbor die. 550,000 people, we become numb. 6 million Jews, we became numb. I sort of understand when this song was written, when the person wrote this little description, that they didn't realize what they were doing by saying what they were saying, that they were sort of just smoothing over the horror of the Holocaust, even though they think they are acknowledging it, and they won't. Because those people in the cellar were people like you and me. just like the 550,000 people who died, people like you and me, who done some good, some bad, who has dead, who has children, parents, family, job, who knows? But when we are faced with that, that comes close to home. When the virus becomes too scary, when it becomes we can get sick, it can happen to us. But I told you there is a second way too, that we respond when we are faced with something traumatic, when we are faced with a friend who say have cancer, or are going through a horrible divorce, or whose family member has died of COVID. And I read a really interesting thing this week, and I want to read it for you instead of saying it in my own words, because I thought this pastor said it very well of how we respond. And you may recognize yourself in this, because I recognize myself in this. It can feel nearly impossible to talk with somebody you love that are in pain and resist any offering of solutions. When our best friend or sibling is suffering from a bad breakup, an intractable work relationship, a futile financial situation, we automatically go into solving mode. We become fixers and offer elixirs, certain we know just the right therapist, the right strategy, the right book, the right pharmaceuticals to make it all come right, or at least numb it for a little while. Do you recognize yourself when your friend complains or are suffering or are struggling? We have so much solutions for them. We see what they need to come out of the situation. Why do we do that? Because your friend is not sharing their suffering with you because they want you to fix it. So she writes, but almost no advice is good enough to replace the simple efficacy of deep listening. Deep listening has benefits to the listener too, said Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the actual Christians that did resist Nazis and were willing to die for it. The one who can no longer listen to his brother will soon no longer be listening to God either. He will be doing nothing but prattle in the presence of God as well. The need to fix other people's problems is about making ourselves more comfortable. It is about our own ego and not our soul. It always comes back to the same thing. Your friend is suffering and it makes you uncomfortable. You know, when I was a chaplain, I saw that so many times. When people had, say, a child dying, that family members wouldn't come visit or friends won't come visit. They just couldn't face them. They wouldn't go into the room when a person dies. For me, who loves dogs, I have seen how many dog owners who has to put down their dog, refuse to be with their dog when the dog gets put down. It's about ourselves. It's always about ourselves, making ourselves comfortable when we are scared by our own vulnerability. And so I've been reading the Psalms during this year, because the Psalms about people who cries out their suffering to God, because apparently nobody around them wants to hear them or gonna give them, easy solutions, or, if you just do this, did you think about this? Instead, Psalms is about people bearing their soul, their pain, their suffering to God. God's not answering them back. God's listening. And that's all we really needed. There's needed somebody to hear their suffering, to witness their suffering. When you're trained as a chaplain, that's the first thing you are taught. You are there to do deep listening. Somebody wants you to witness their suffering. It makes you less alone in your suffering. And I think that person who wrote that 3 sentences on that wall wanted somebody to know they were there, wanted somebody to know about their suffering, to witness it. And so one of the Psalms that really stands out for me about this need that for God to just hear us is Psalm 31. I'm going to read the first 5 verses for you. It says, "In you, O Lord, I seek refuge. Do not let me ever be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. You are indeed my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out of the net that is hidden for me. You are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes wasted away from grief, my body and soul also. So it doesn't take much to figure out this person has been suffering for a very, very long time. And they are calling out to God, just hear me, be my safety, be my rock, be my refuge where I can find solace. But they also say a very interesting thing. Into your hand I commit my spirit. It is that resignation, the acceptance of what is happening to them. And so you will recognize those words because it's the very words Jesus said on the cross when he dies. Into your soul I commit, into your hand I commit my spirit, my soul. This person who writes the psalm knows they can't be safe. They just need to be heard. They need somebody to witness their suffering. And I think that's why the writer of the song that we did in the beginning, Inscription of Hope, changed the words. They just need to know that God is there. And actually in the song, it comes out beautifully in those few verses. I'm going to just read a few again, because I know you don't have the script in front of you. When he says, but sometimes in the suffering and hopeless despair, my heart cries for shelter, to know someone is there. When we suffer, we so desperately need somebody else to know we're suffering, to witness, to be our refuge in the suffering. Not to save us, because there are times that we know that there is no salvation. And this writer, or this psalmist that wrote Psalm 31 knows there is no escape. They have been suffering for a very, very long time. I just told you that this psalm was quoted by Jesus on the cross, but it's interesting that it was also quoted by someone else. The second person who repeated the first lines of the song, of those words that was written on the wall. The guy's name is C. College, and I'm sure I'm saying it incorrectly. He's a Lithuanian Jew, and he was in a concentration camp. And in 1947, he published a book of short stories that is called The Tiger Beneath the Skin. If you can find an English translation of this book, buy it for yourself. Because this tells you how people felt in 1947 after they went through the Holocaust. It's not the smoothing over. It's not the easy theologies. It is the raw anger, the rage, the bitterness, the suffering, the horror. And so this book is a collection of stories. They are fictional, but they could have just as been true stories, because it's quite sure that all those horrid stuff happened during the Holocaust. But it shows you how people felt. So he first published in 1946 a short story that he's going to use these three verses in, or these three first lines of the song, or the three lines that were written on a wall in a cellar in Cologne, Germany. I'm quite sure he didn't see the words himself. It doesn't take much of a stretch that he must have heard the German prisoner of war repeating those words. And if I were him, I would have been a little bit upset, because it was clear what the soldier was doing. He was trying to smooth his own conscience for what he was part of. So he uses the same three words, but he turns them around. He actually put God last and not the love of a neighbor, the way the person who composed the song did it, but for very different reason. So, as I said, it's a fictional story, and in the story he sets it up as this is a message that's found in a bottle, a note in a bottle. And in this note, it tells about this man who lived in the Warsaw Ghetto and who was part of the Jewish resistance fighting the Nazis. Tells about his family and friends that died. It tells about him killing German soldiers and Nazis. And it tells of him knowing that he will die too. So somebody comes upon this bottle, open the note and reads it. So that is the plot of the story. And so then he starts the story like this. This is how he starts the story. After the epigraph, it says, I believe in the sun if it's not shining. I believe in love when it's not apparent. I believe in God when he is silent. He says, I died peacefully. Interesting way to start a story, but is to understand he's not going to survive. I died peacefully, but not complacently. Persecuted, but not enslaved. Embittered, but not cynical. A believer, but not a supplicant. A lover of God, but not a blind amen sayer of his. And so throughout all these stories, including this one, he has this argument with God. He is constantly arguing with God. How could you, God, allow this to happen to people? And so it is not about his faith in God. That is unshakable. It's very clear. It is his disappointment in God that God didn't do anything. It is raw. You're going to read it. Make sure you didn't eat something before, because these stories will make you puke. They are horrific. It will take away the numbness of 6 million people being genocide during the Holocaust, and it will tell you their personal stories. It will bring it home to you. It will take away your comfort that we do by being numb and apathetic to when a lot of people die. And then he ends this short story, the note in a bottle ends like this. And into your hands, Lord, I consign my soul. This understanding that I'm going to die, and I give myself to God, accepting this that has happened to me. Not happy with it, embittered, but not cynical. Didn't shake in my faith, but God, I'm very angry with you. And in all of this, I consign my soul to you, God. When we read the Gospels, they 3 times uses a psalm that Jesus quotes. He quotes Psalm 31, the one I just told you about. He quotes Psalm 22 when he says, Eloi, Eloi, sabachthani, or the translation, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? That's Psalm 22. And he quotes Psalm 69. So if you want to understand what Jesus is going on inside him, what he's feeling, experiencing, when he's on the cross, you have to go read those 3 Psalms, because they tells you what he's thinking. They tell you what he's feeling. And Psalm 31 is very interesting, because there's not just this part where he says, I've been suffering, I know there's no way out, I'm giving my soul over to you, I trust in you now, God, to take it from here. There's a second part in Psalm 31, and I'm going to read it to you, because that is something else. And it's from verse 9 to 18, and it goes like this. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my misery, and my bones waste away. So, as I said, he's been struggling and suffering a very long time, this writer. And then he says, I am the scorn of all my adversaries. And that's not a surprise, yeah. People are killing him, they are attacking him. But then he says a very surprising thing. He says, a horror to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I have passed out of mind like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel. For I hear the whispering of so many, terror all around, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. That is weird. People are attacking him, he's suffering, and then his very neighbors, his family, his loved ones, they all run away from him, they despise him. Who else did that happen to? Remember when Jesus hanging on the cross, what people were doing? They were taunting him. Not Romans, his own people were taunting him as he hung on the cross. This is what this person in the Psalms is experiencing. And then amidst that rejection of his family, of his friends, of his neighbors, of his kin, the only place he can find refuge from that is in God, amidst the suffering. And he writes, "But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies and persecutors. Let your face shine upon your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. Do not let me be put to shame, O Lord, for I call on you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them go dumbfounded to Sheol. Let the lying lips be stilled that speak insolent against the righteous with pride and contempt." You remember I told you there's 3 ways that we respond to people in suffering. The first way is we become numb, apathetic. The second way is to try and fix people instead of just being there for them. The third way is when we victimize people, when we blame people for what is happening to them. And so I read this really good quote this week as I was researching this. It just spoke to me, and he says, "When we see someone who is afflicted with physical or mental illness or homelessness or disability, we tend, out of fear for our own vulnerability, to recoil and to regard that person with disdain. When we experience affliction, we see that disdain in the eyes of others, and we even come to believe ourselves to be worthless. Often acute suffering is in the eyes of human beings criminal. It is in the social degradation, the scorn and the rejection of others, which elicits the deepest wounds upon the afflicted. The psalm writer's tone is one of grief, but also of astonishment that compassion is nowhere to be found. The speaker is scorned by adversaries, which, although troubling, is not particularly surprising. You know, your enemies, you expect your enemies to treat you bad. But rejection and revulsion are felt closer and closer to home. The psalmist is a horror to his neighbors. And that is the part that gets him. Not that he has enemies that is going to hurt him and is hurting and is making his life hell, but that his own friends and family turns on him. If you read the book of Job, you'll see it too. When everything goes wrong in Job's life, his friend says, "Well, you must have done something wrong. It's all your fault." We saw it this week play out with this mass shooting of Asian American women, where they were literally blamed for what happened to them, that in some way their career had something to do with it, and that actually they should be blamed for that. That's when we re-victimize people. And we do that because the opposite would be too scary. What if mass shooters just go out and just shoot whoever they want? That seems too scary. So you have to be blamed for what happened to you. We just do that because it makes us feel safe. We are confronted with our frailty as human beings, and how scary and uncontrollable this world is when something bad happens to something else. And so then we have to go, well, you know, if that black man didn't resist arresting, he would have been still alive. That's what we do. We re-victimize people that have already been victimized. And that is what Psalm 31 is about. This man is being victimized by his own neighbors, his own loved one, his own kin, that is horrified of him, as if there's something wrong with him. And it's the same thing that happens to Jesus when he hangs on the cross. His own king is taunting him because they are scared. Jesus must have done something wrong. There must be something wrong with him. Otherwise, why is he hanging on a cross? Because if he's just an innocent victim, then it could happen to them too. So we're taunting. This is what we as human beings do. That's our free defense mechanisms for not facing horror, for not facing our own frailty, for not facing the little control we have in this world, for not facing evil. We either become numb or have apathy, or we try to fix people's problems, or we blame them for what happened to them. And as long as we do that, there is no way out. There is no hope for humanity. It becomes really difficult to believe in a beloved and caring God in a world like that. It becomes really difficult to believe in love and the goodness of human beings when we keep on doing that. So I want to read for you Luke 23 when Jesus said these words. And you're going to recognize that POW in the centurion. Listen what he says when Jesus dies. So I'm reading from Luke chapter 23, verses 44 to 49. It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. While the sun's light faded and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Jesus knows there's no way out. Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what has taken place, he praised God and said, certainly this man was innocent. That soldier stood there. He's a centurion. He was in charge of the crucifixion that just happened. And now he's faced with what he did. And so he's trying to make himself feel better and go, oh, he was indeed innocent. Yeah, actually, I did know some Christians that stood up to the Nazis, although I was the soldier who killed people and did some horrific stuff. But it's not the end there. And then all the crowds who had gathered there, this is the people who taunted Jesus, and when all the crowds who had gathered there for the spectacle saw what has taken place, now it becomes dark and the temple's veil is torn in two, and they realize, sort of when we are confronted with the evil we were part of. They returned home beating their breasts, feeling so horrible. But all his acquaintances, including the woman who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. See, that's why I have hope in humanity, because there were people who stayed. There were people who watched Jesus die, who witnessed his suffering. He wasn't alone. There were others there for him. They couldn't save him. They didn't try. They didn't look away, and they didn't taunt him, and they didn't try to fix it. They just bear witness to his suffering. So as we post on social media this week and discuss what happened, remember these three reactions. Don't do them. Witness what happened to these women. Bear witness to the tragedy. Bear witness to the tragedy of all Asian American women that are fearful right now to walk in streets. Bear witness to all Asian Americans that are scared right now for violent and vicious attacks. Bear witness. Then we can say, I believe in God even if he's silent. I believe in God and love when it is not apparent. Here is the quartet singing Inscription of Hope.
I believe in the sun, even when it is not shining, and I believe in love, even when there's no one there, and I believe in God, even when He is silent. I believe through any trial, there is always the way. sun.